Welcome to Nav Chat, the show for the New Zealand orienteering and navigation sports community.
Hi Gene, how are you?
Hey Tom, yeah, I'm going well. I've just had a busy week. Also a few injuries, so I've been training fairly well since about Easter, so since nationals. I've been up and running, and I've been in a pretty good role actually, but finally hit a few issues, and not running issues as well, which is always a joke I have with my physio. Is whenever I see him and he's saying, "Oh, okay, what should we focus on for next time?" I say, "It doesn't matter. Don't plan ahead. Like, book an appointment. I will have a new problem." And I pulled a muscle in my shoulder, doing too much mapping work on the computer.
Oh my gosh!
So it was just super tight. Yeah, it was just like so tight. And then I was like, so I didn't pull it. I actually hurt it by trying to like do trigger releasing on the muscle. And
who knew that mapping was so dangerous? The most dangerous part is inside of the computer as well, not out in the bush.
Yeah, but to be honest, I think maybe that isn't that surprising to some people, that staying in the same place for hours on end, days on end, with your arm, like kind of just using the same muscles back and forward, is not good for that.
Didn't do the training in advance.
No, it was totally out of the blue, no build up, and then suddenly 6 hours of cartography per day. So yeah, so that was gnarly. And then I think I've strained my popliteus. Maybe you can tell us about that little guy.
Popliteus.
Yeah.
That muscle on the back of your knee.
Yeah, little guy. It doesn't seem to have contributed anything to my life in 29 years. But I think I've discovered it now. I think I've discovered it. I'm sure it does something.
How on earth did you injure your popliteus?
Overstretching, I think, was the thing. Just done a jog and thought I'd knuckle down on a big stretch session, and just kind of trying to do some hamstring stretches. But oh man, it was real funky afterwards, and it's taken a few days of no running to get that guy working again. But we're good. We're good.
These sound like very hectic, high impact injuries, Jim. How old are you again?
29.
29 going on 89.
It feels like it. Yeah. Gosh. Okay. So we've got some back in the running this week. Hopefully, no more dumb things like that.
Cool. Yeah. Very good. This month we have Nav Chat that looks a little bit different from previous. Similar sort of structure, but we've got a guest who is talking to us more about orienteering and some of their past experiences. We've got a legend of the sport in New Zealand. Who are we talking to this week, Gene?
Yeah, I did an interview with Val Robinson. So Val is a very active member of County's Manukau Orienteering Club, and she does a lot for the school scene in that area. Does a lot of coaching and introducing schools to orienteering. And yeah, back in the day was not only a very good orienteer, but a very speedy road runner.
Very speedy.
Yeah. So I sat down with her and we jumped back in time, a long way back in time actually, and hear about some of the early days of New Zealanders competing on the international scene in orienteering.
Joyce, shall we go have a listen?
Yeah, check it out. Thanks, Val. Thanks for coming on Nav Chat. The past few months, we've talked to Tim Robertson and Toby Scott, who are some of our current NZ reps. They're currently living in Europe and have done JWOC and World Cup recently. And we thought we would jump way back and hear from some of our earlier JWOC competitors, some of our earlier New Zealand representatives. And I got pointed in your direction. So were you one of our first to do a JWOC for New Zealand?
Yes, it was right back in 76, and we got talked into orienteering by John and Robin Davies when they came back to New Zealand, and we were living in Tokoroa. I wasn't an orienteer at all, and I never
when you
done
went to your first JWOC?
Oh no, not when I went to the first JWOC, but when John and Robin came back. and they tried to talk us into doing orienteering because they were living in Batara and we were living in Tokoroa. And I said no, and Robbie said yes. And we got pushed into it that way.
And I understand you guys had quite a keen running background.
Yes, yes, I was still running right up there at that stage when they came to Tokoroa. And Tania was very little, and I had a full-time job, and I was finding it hard to run for New Zealand and do my job and look after Tania. And I was looking for another sport really that I wouldn't be expected to do any good at and that I could just keep fit. And that's really how we came into orienteering.
Cool. So what was the scene like in New Zealand around that time, comparing it to what we're familiar with now?
A lot less events, of course. In Tokoroa, the Pinelands was started by John and Robin Davies. And we were very fortunate because we had a huge amount of forest, as you know, and Kinleith Paperworks were very obliging, and they had kind of contours for their forest. So that was used as a base for our maps. They were just black and white maps, of course. And we printed the maps off, and then you took colouring in pencils with you to the forest to colour it in to make the map. You did it off a master map, and you coloured it in to make where the farmland was and where the forest was and where roads were and that sort of thing. And then you drew your own course onto the map from the master map.
So a mapper would go out and add the colour, and then that map would be replicated, like photocopied
by each individual when they came to the event.
Or would they have to colour it in themselves, the individual?
Yes.
Okay, that didn't get photocopied. Wow, a lot of manual stuff. Yeah, I was just young enough that when I was doing the local events in Auckland as a kid, we had to draw the courses on from like a master course. But yeah, it's pretty. It sounds pretty strange drawing adding your own colours onto the map. That's different.
When we came to Auckland, Waiuku Forest had no contours or anything like that. And this was in 1976. We came to live in Auckland, and we put the students like Tania and Bryce and those sort of people on one of the courses from those original maps with just pine trees in the forest for, saying where the trees were. And they both said if that had been orienteering, they would never have done it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm glad that you guys have gone through that stage so that the rest of us haven't had to.
Exactly.
So where was that first World Champs that you went to, and what was the motivation for a New Zealand team to decide that year? You'd got some sort of critical mass, some critical enthusiasm, enough to go over and experience what the big time is like.
Well, just before we came up from Tokoroa, it must have been I think it was 75, Roland Offroll from Sweden. Have you heard of him?
I haven't heard of him.
Okay, well, he was the coach of the first New Zealand team, and he was a very prominent orienteer in Sweden. And a group of 8 came out to New Zealand to try and teach teachers in different schools how to teach orienteering. And he came to Tokoroa, and Robbie was the Z teacher with Graham Peters at Tokoroa High. And so he spent some days with Robbie, and he taught him how to map around a school and how to teach the students. And Kevin Ireland was one of those students. And so they made maps of the schools around Tokoroa and out in the forest and at Kevin Ireland's farm. They were year, or equivalent today to year 12 and 13 students that they were using in, I think it was about 15 of them. And that group learned quite a lot of orienteering from what Roland had taught us. So that sort of got us motivated. And so when we came to Auckland, it had been decided Robin and John Davies wanted to go to the World Champs in Scotland, and because they'd been in England and Canada. And so they tried to, I'd run reasonably well on a couple of events because I could run fast enough to get myself out of trouble when I got into trouble. And so they kitted us to go, and we'd shifted up to Auckland. But so there was Robin Davies and John, they went over to England a little bit before, and then Robbie and I went over, and we went to Scotland first to where Roland's home was, and he had us two and the Australians there. And so he spent probably 2 weeks trying to teach us something. And so that was our training towards WOC. And we did learn a lot from him, but we were really not up to that standard, although Robbie did really well at that event, at WOC. I did quite well over the second half of the course, but I had a couple of very bad controls early on. But it was a real eye-opener, and it was real fun, and it was up in Scotland, and it was beautiful forest. And so that was my introduction to WOC, which is nothing like what you people have. You're all well-trained, very knowledgeable orienteers before you end up in anything like that, while we were just thrown in the deep end.
Yeah, although it's still quite similar, trying to go over a bit beforehand, there is always some learning you can do and some acclimatization that you can do. So that was very, very familiar. What events were at WOC in those days?
Just the long and the relay.
Okay.
And because it was only Robin and I can't remember whether it was a 3 or 4. No, it must have been 3. And because there was only Robin and I, and there was only, Colin Bathley went 2. So the boys had a relay team, but Robin and I didn't have a relay team, so we only ran the long.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And how many more trips did you do in the following years over to Europe?
Right.
And did you notice a progression in yourself? Did you feel that you were becoming more confident in yourself as a navigator?
Right. The world champs at that stage was every second year. So they had, the next one was in 1978, and because they wanted the world champs not to be in the even years, they had one in 78 and another one in 79. And at that time, Robbie really wanted to go to England for a year, not only for orienteering, but he wanted to run the World Masters Marathon in Germany, which was going to be in 79. And so we got jobs in England for 1 year, just took 1 year's leave. And so we went to, first of all, the world champs in Norway, which Roland came again with us and was our coach. And Uni Lewis came to that one, and so did Trish Burbridge. And so there was 3 of us at that one. And that was in Norway. And as you know, Norway orienteering is very difficult. But Roland was very, very good in having patience with us all. And so we were getting better as each time went by. But still, it was very, very difficult. And then we went to England for that following year, and we learned a huge amount because we were orienteering virtually every weekend, and we ran for Southern Navigators, which was a really very friendly, supportive club, and they put us in all sorts of events all over the country. And so by the end of that year, although I was 39, I was good enough to run in the elite grade and still perform at gold level. So as you can imagine, that's a huge step forward from where I'd been when we went to England. And so then we went to Finland from there because we had 1 year's leave, and I just had enough time to go to Finland to the World Masters, the World Champs, and then come home. And we performed a lot better there than we had before.
Cool. Yeah, that's really good to see that practice can really make a big difference in how quickly you improve when you're quite motivated and quite focused and got that good advice as well. That's something that we still see us getting friendly with some of the European coaches, and some really nice coaches out there have lent us the resources that is sometimes hard to take all the way from New Zealand.
Yes.
And the local advice.
And there were so many very good events with, very good maps in England at that time. It might interest you to know that when Tania was 7 and we went to an event, and we always took her around a course afterwards. And this time we didn't have time. And so she said to me, can I have 50p? So I gave her the 50p. And she hadn't quite turned 7, she went and registered herself and went out on this course. And Robbie's out on the course, and she's, "Hi, Daddy, I'm doing a course by myself." And he thought, my gosh, and this is in the forest.
Yeah.
And then I saw her, and I thought, oh my gosh. And when we both got back, what are we going to do? We'll leave her. Anyway, she got round the course, and from then on, she always wanted to do it by herself.
Yeah, I guess when you're ready, hopefully. And when you've got the confidence, she was ready. I was definitely much older, I think, when I wanted to do it by myself. But then the time came when I was ready and I finally understood what we were supposed to be doing. And the time was right. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing those experiences with us. I'm sure everyone will be really interested to hear what it was like. So thanks, Val.
Thank you.
Right, that's a pretty cool insight into how orienteering was in the 70s and 80s in New Zealand. Sounds like it was really just a pretty small group of friends, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, it definitely sounds that way, and that is consistent with some of the things I've heard about the Auckland scene, and especially from the mapping angle. I've seen some of, just because of my dad's involvement with mapping for orienteering, there's a bit of a treasure trove in some cupboard in our house with some of these old attempts at mapping using just techniques that look rather frustrating now, given the computers that we've got to help us and the LiDAR data and stuff that we have now. A lot of familiar
names too. Lots of the names that were mentioned by Val are people who are still orienteering, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. We're definitely standing on the shoulders of some very committed individuals who love the sport and did a lot just to grow the events, but also just to run the essential mapping. That was, we can't do any orienteering without creating these maps. So it's pretty amazing just to remind you that we're making maps on top of that updates of a previous map, and if you go all the way back, you find there's someone's making the map for the first time, and the whole sport rests upon that. So mad kudos to those.
We need to go and find some of these old Pinelands maps, I reckon. No orienteering in Tokoroa at the moment, but surely there's got to be some terrain out there.
Well, maybe we should talk to Paul Island, who I think has a bit of a stash of some of these maps, and I think some of the Aucklanders did a little adventure down there some weekends ago where they travelled down and used some of these old maps. So
that would be amazing.
Story. Yeah, I should. I'll talk to Paul, and I think Cameron Delisle was quite involved in that, putting some of these areas together and running some courses before having scouted the area, except for what Google Street View could provide. So
nice.
We'll look on for them for a future month, perhaps.
Maybe one of the upcoming months, indeed. Now, to move on to the coaching segment this month, there wasn't really a specific map or technique we could lean on from what Val talked about, but we are casting our eyes back to JWOC, which went on, the European Junior Orienteering Champs that happened last month in Turkey. In Australia.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it sounds like a lot
of Americans, no South Africans. Anyway, the long distance, at first glance, if you scroll a bit to the northeast on this map, maybe a bit away from the arena, I think it would be, see what you think about this, but I think that if you showed me this map and you said, where in New Zealand is this? I would probably give you a few different ideas of where I would think this would be in New Zealand. It looks pretty typical gully spur, right?
Yeah, that's right. We've definitely got areas in New Zealand that have quite similar contour detail to this. Maybe some of the slopes on this are a little bit bigger. They're these straight slopes and maybe a little bit bigger than some areas. There's a few different characteristics, but
the spurs here also green on top, which is maybe if you really thought about it, would be a bit of a giveaway, because typically you'd expect that to be a bit more open in New Zealand.
Yeah, and continental European terrain has this feature where the tops are quite smooth and vague, and then it gets steeper down into the gully, whereas a lot of our spur gully stuff is actually kind of steep all the way to the ridgeline and then steep down the other side, as opposed to having these flat, broad hilltops with a drop off.
Indeed. So we're going to talk about a few techniques in gully spur. We've focused a lot on rock detail terrain and on sand dune terrain. So gully spur, common in New Zealand, Wairarapa, a little bit in the Hawke's Bay, a wee bit in the Waikato, a little bit in the South Island. The techniques you want to use are a bit different. And first thing we were going to talk a wee bit about was about route choice and about how you can approach a medium to longer leg and take into account your planning, your route choice, some of the potential traps and some of the trade-offs that you can make in your route choice selection. So do you want to take us in on to one of these legs, Gene?
Yeah, I think we'll jump onto, we'll scroll through for these first few that are less consequential. We will jump onto 7. So I've massed out of the field from 7. So first thoughts about 7 is it's a pretty classic route choice leg where they're pitching you across a number of slopes, and going straight takes too much up and down. So you've got to bail out to a path on either side. It's very typical, and I think a lot of these legs, it's quite useful to work backwards in the planning, just to see what is a safe way to get into the control, and also what is an efficient way to get into the control. So getting close to the control and finding you have to go up a large hill in the final 200 meters is not a terribly efficient way to get there. So I think it's important to consider the end of the leg as just as important as the start of the leg or any other part of that leg.
Agreed.
So, yeah, and just identify the big challenges on the leg where you could lose the race if you don't respect the big challenges. So the big gullies in this case here to be respected. You can count those contours if you like. I'm happy just acknowledging that there's a lot of contours. So I'm not going to be counting them right here, but I think it looks steep.
I think with some of these as well, we often emphasize, especially in point detail terrain, the importance of these really distinctive attack points. In this terrain, you've got plenty of attack points. You're probably the actual route choice and being decisive about a route choice is probably more useful and something more to focus on. And just like you described, we've got our left option, our right option. We've got Jonas from Hungary who's decided on a straight option. Good on him. But this is pretty typical in the way you'd see runners split up on a well-set leg in gully spur terrain.
Yep, that's right. It is a well-balanced leg. And mentioning the attack points here, I think the path with the erosion gully obviously is a very safe attack point from one direction.
Highway to the control, isn't it?
Yep, and we've got the large green patch from the other direction. So quite a big difference in times actually on this leg. It was notably faster to go around to the north. So that's of note. And the way to train that is just by doing route choices in training over and over again and improve your recognition of distance and height judgment.
Another possible trap here, and this league emphasizes it quite well, is when we think about our navigation, we sometimes forget that navigation takes energy. So if we're in a state where we're really taxing our body's energy system, like we've just run up a hill really quickly, we've just run at high speed, sometimes not only are we moving faster through the terrain and having to read more detail, but we are starving our brain of the oxygen it needs to do all that processing. So on these longer legs where you've got an up and a down option, deciding when you take your climb is relevant. The runners who went north took their climb early, descended into the control. The other runners did the opposite, dropped and climbed late. Of note, 8 is followed very quickly by 9. So this is common. You'll get your short controls after a long leg. And if you're in oxygen debt punching 8, you're not going to be at your optimal thinking speed trying to get this short control to 9, next control to 10. And I think if all things being equal, generally I would look to try and take my climb earlier and descend into the control. If given that I've got equal attack points and all that sort of stuff, just for that little bit of extra wiggle room you get in terms of your ability to process things mentally. What do you reckon? Does that come into your thought process?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. And obviously the caveat there is all things equal. And the challenge with these route choice legs is you've always got a number of different factors trading off against themselves. But certainly
sending into a control does always carry.
Yeah, that's one of the positives. If you can be fresher in those final 200 meters coming in, that's a moment that's really crucial to be precise, where it's not so important to be precise leaving the previous control in most cases.
Now, the other thing I wanted to mention about this gully spur terrain is this map is covered in tracks. We've got a New Zealand map queued up on next, I think, which has slightly fewer tracks.
Yeah, we'll jump across to this guy.
So, Wairarapa. And while there are a few tracks, and it's the gully spur's slightly different, there's slightly more rounded hills, not quite as steep, we still have some of the similar challenges. And I think it's important here to point out some other classes of attack points that are especially useful in gully spur terrain. One I'd start with is a saddle. I think saddles come into their own in gully spur terrain. And this doesn't just count for orienteering, this is talking adventure racing as well. It's a really obvious point feature that the terrain feeds you into, and it allows you to have a stepping stone or attack point along the leg that is also usually the easiest run ability and has the least amount of climb. So I really rate saddles as something to use as a stepping stone along a leg. So 2 to 3, for instance, trying to pick, there's a fence in the way, but say you run a bit of a straight, you look at a straight route, it's not great. You can maybe angle out right. I mean, the line you've drawn there is not bad. You could maybe hook out right through the saddle, come down and then get the higher saddle. So
okay. Were you thinking of coming?
Yeah, I was thinking of coming through and then up over the creek and then to the left and then through that little saddle there. I know where I am at that point. I can go through this vague area and then I can go through another saddle there and then into the control.
Yeah, that final saddle is actually a really nice attack point. It really lines you up. And I like your point about choosing some features of the terrain where the natural shape of the terrain aligns with your objective as the orienteer. So it means even if you're not the sharpest at that moment, you just get guided nicely in the right direction.
Interestingly as well, often when adventure racing, I'll often find in native bush that I'll count saddles more than hilltops. The hilltops, some parts of the bush can be very flat and vague, whereas a saddle is a saddle. There's always a nice low point there that you can clearly identify to gauge how far along the hill system you are.
Yep. In my framing, I like to talk about lines in the terrain or points in the terrain. Mm-hmm. And that ridge line is a line. You know where you are to the left or to the right, but you don't know if you're too far up the ridge or too far down the ridge. And with a saddle, it's actually a point in the terrain. You know you can't be too far north, too far south, too far east, too far west. You know exactly where you are.
Another trap I wanted to mention about gully spur terrain is the risk for parallel errors. So if we go to the west from Control 2 into the river system, you can see there are lots of 90-degree joins between creeks. A lot of the time, these can look really similar. And if you have not really been paying attention, you might drop out of the creek, out of Control 2. Say we were doing a different leg, but drop out of that control. You might just be a little bit unsure and then hit this valley. And if you're not really careful on your compass, you can actually think you're maybe at the next junction. Many a time I've seen people make, and I've made them myself, where you've got ahead of yourself, you've misread these these very common 90-degree junctions, not consulted your compass, and ended up making a large parallel error. This map's got a bit more distinctive detail on it, but somewhere like the old Waiheke or Stillwater maps, or up in Northland on the Hoto map, those are some areas where that was a real risk.
Yeah, to me, it happens when you actually are not disciplined enough to stick to the handrail itself and you try to deviate and you find yourself back on it. So I can imagine leaving 2 with the objective of cutting over and going down here. But what's actually happened is that you've got bent around and you've collided with the stream here, thinking that you collided with it here. And if without checking the compass fits your plan, came down the hill to the left, hit the stream, turned to the right and ran along the stream. But yeah, you're off, you're way off, and everything still makes sense. So the alarm bells aren't going. It's quite a dangerous mistake, actually.
Alrighty, so to summarize what we've talked about with gully spur terrain, we mentioned that the route choice approach and planning ahead, you've got some slightly different priorities in gully spur terrain. You want to make sure you think really clearly at the start about your route choices. You want to look wide and consciously make a decision about whether you want to take on climb. Do you want to go high? Do you want to go low? Also made it really important to think about your entry to the control, and that final control entry is alongside route choices with one of your other priorities. We then also mentioned saddles as a really useful navigation feature in gully spur terrain, and then emphasize the importance of sticking to your plan so you don't make parallel errors in some of the repetitive detail. Sound about right?
That sounds about right. I just spotted another good example of using some saddles on this leg here, where you can actually be quite aggressive on this leg because the terrain will naturally pull you through the saddle here on your way. And as long as you're taking some climb up here, once again, you get sucked in to this saddle here, and then you're already at a very natural height to see the control feature. So there's another great example. Whereas trying to go higher, you lose some of those benefits of the saddle. So yeah, saddles are great.
Nice. Now you recently set an event in some gully spur terrain of sorts, a little thicker vegetation than this, but you were going to talk.
So yeah, I was controlling an event, a local event here in Wellington, and yeah, the terrain is tough. And again, I run the trails in this place all the time, and like still just hugely underestimated how tough this terrain is when you have to go through it. And yeah, there are a few good learning points for me there as a controller, and also good points for the course setter, who was Rachel Baker from Wellington Orienteering Club. And we test ran some of these courses and made them shorter, but just that difference when you're training at an elite level kind of gives you, I think, not the most representative sense of how thick and steep terrain affects the rest of the field, like you might expect. And so I really got some good feedback about calibrating that a little bit better in the future, because these the red long and red medium winning times were definitely longer than what we thought. So yeah, this is tough and really good for a long distance, because it's quite a battle emotionally, I think, when there's a lot of supplejack in this forest, which is some of the most frustrating vegetation ever, because you can see where you've got to go, but you're tripping up all the time. What are your thoughts on this, having seen this for the first time, Tom?
I'd say it does look pretty long, would be my first comment. I mean, I know we've talked about it a bit, but looks pretty long. My second thought is...
Yeah, it's 4.5 kilometers, by the way.
Yeah, maybe, what's the scale? Is it 1 to 10?
It's 1 to 7,500.
Okay,
7,500. So yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned that. It's actually zoomed in slightly.
So maybe not. Yeah, maybe not so long then. If this is 1 to 10, this would be a decent long distance. I think probably the thought which I have looking at this is, I'd say, great. Let's rethink the kind of terrain we need for a nationals long. Wouldn't it be wild to have a more track-based urban Wellington sprint, middle, long nationals. I reckon that'd be exciting.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting. It has to be well done. And I think an area like this can be done poorly or well. And you can get some really interesting route choices, I think, which is the objective of a long distance, is to set challenging and interesting route choices with physically demanding terrain.
Oh yeah, I agree. It looks great. I would love to. Maybe when I'm in Wellington, I can go for a jog.
Yeah, that's right. Thoughts on the long lead quickly?
Let's move the map around a little. So that's 6 to 7, is it?
Yeah.
All right.
Just zoom
Maybe
out
just
there
zoom
for
us
you.
a little bit. A little bit more. There we go. All righty. So trying to put into practice what we just talked about. I'm looking for options, left, right, straight. So we've got a way left option, which is up the track, all the way up to the clear area, and then coming around the top and dropping into the track onto the control. So that's our like extreme wide option. Do we have a right option? Maybe we could go right back towards the start, and then alongside that row of distinctive trees into the river system, straight ahead and up onto the spur, and then sort of turn left and then climb up to the control.
So was it down here you mentioned?
No, straight up through there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you go up past the trees, north, keep going north, down into that, left, up there, up onto the spur, and then up, and then probably just straight from there, I guess.
You could do either.
Tack point would be the stream junction, one of those. And then is there a zigzaggy sort of straight option? I guess you could start the same as the red leg, so left, but then peel off down the hill on the really switchbacky trail.
What do you mean?
Halfway
up to there?
Yep, up here, down, and then left, and then contour around, and then across the white and into the control. You know, I think my heart says purple, but my brain says red.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point you've made. I feel this sense of trying to win the leg and trying to be and beat the core setter as well, like trying to find this thread the needle and like get the best of both worlds. And that's something that maybe I play around with more on local events, when you can try these more bold approaches. But when it comes time to the big races, I tend to just pull my head in and play it safe every time and try not to lose the race on any particular leg by trying to thread the needle. And so,
actually, the more that I look at it, right actually looks.
Yeah, I think both left and right have a similar philosophy where they're actually quite safe, and you can visually see on the map where the challenges are and exactly how big the challenges you face will be, especially with left. It's very obvious that you've got to take on one big climb and it's very easy going from then on. Whereas it's a little bit harder to understand the straight route and exactly, are you going to count every little contour to see actually how much climb do you have to take on?
Yeah.
You could invest the time in trying to do it.
I'd go left. As I went past the turn off to purple, I'd regret it, but keep going. Then I'd figure out that blue existed halfway to number 7 and feel terrible about it again. And then probably still, I think left would be fastest.
Mm-hmm.
What do you reckon? Do you know which was best?
They're almost identical. We've tested them.
All three?
Actually, the one that was tested wasn't actually this purple. It was, I'm going to do a different purple. It was, it was something like this, actually.
Oh yeah, not bad, not bad.
Yeah, so that was also quite good. I think that's what it was.
I think we've just proven that this terrain would work for a carnival sort of long distance.
Yeah, I think it will work
just
for
by
long
a
distance.
few leagues like this.
Yeah, and you can use it for middle distance, I think, if you start high so that you're going downhill and that actually increases the speed. Yeah, maybe not this. particular area, but the style of area, if you just get the white patches close enough together, I think you can do a good middle distance. And for row gaining, let's not forget row gaining. This is so easy because it's right on the edge of town. You can easily just do a 90-minute row gain. For those of us who want to go hard, you can put some controls up the hill. But there's heaps of trails, so it's like the best of all worlds for a 90-minute row gain.
Totally. All right, shall we leave it there with the coaching corner for this month and move on to some of the other interesting things we've spotted in the last month? I think first we're going to mention just from, as you do, just sifting through the ONZ website while you're in lockdown. There's a article on the website which written by Stuart Payne, which is a history of the first 40 years of orienteering in New Zealand, which if you're at a loose end, you've watched everything on Netflix, it's worth a read. It's really interesting. It paints a new light on a lot of the goings on and how orienteering developed in New Zealand. And I think especially relevant given we spoke to Val this month. I was going to just have a browse, but I ended up reading the whole thing.
Yep, that's right. And you start to see some of these old names that we've heard of, and maybe, we were just around as juniors when some of these people were competing in the 80s and maybe even 90s grade. And yeah, it all feels relatively recent that all this has happened. And yeah, you realize just how much progress we've made since the 1950s. So yeah, it's very cool to see just a bit of insight into how we got to where we are, and just a reminder that there's been no point in the past 70 years that orienteering has been a static sport. It's just been improving the whole time. And so those that are around now, it's really up to our imagination as to what orienteering will be in another 20 years. It's never stayed the same. The standards have always improved over the past 70 years. What makes you think that's going to stop? We can get the mapping better. We can get the events better. We can try new formats. I mean, sprint no one would have imagined sprint orienteering at the start. So yeah, what next really?
Indeed, yeah. So with a read, especially if you're interested by what Val talked about, we've got the Tuaraki Northern Orienteering Champs coming up reasonably soon at Labour Weekend. Hopefully we'll have some Aucklanders there. Well, it's not really Northern Champs if they can't come. But yeah, alert levels pending. I'm down to be controller for one event, which is trying something new, Harris Relay or Harris Rogaine, depending on what you want to call it, on one of the evenings. But there's a long distance at O'Kitty Falls, which is a great farm forest mixed map, and some events down in Taupo on some pretty cool areas as well. So good luck with accommodation. It's very hard to find accommodation at the moment. Taupo probably a bit easier than Rotorua, but worth a look if you haven't already entered. Yeah,
cool. I'm looking forward to going, and yeah, hopeful that COVID levels don't get increased, because I think we'd all love a bit of orienteering at this stage. Some of us have had some local things, but we really are missing some of the events where we get to see other people from other regions and hang out for a bit and get some quality racing going, especially on new terrain. I think I just love going to a different place where the style of navigation is different. And I really like that challenge.
Next thing we're going to mention briefly was just sprint relay, because we've got the discipline we haven't really talked about that much. Kind of fits in with your comments about orienteering constantly evolving. Sprint relay is definitely part of that evolution and integration of sprint orienteering into more formats for competitors. Mm-hmm. You've got the map from JWOC Sprint. So sprint relay is mixed teams generally, or at a international level at least, and pretty fast paced, shorter courses than a traditional sprint. I have not done one, to be honest.
Ever.
Have you?
Yeah, well, actually, I've been doing them for a very long time, before they were really a thing. The Auckland clubs for a while there had a challenging time trying to get the inter-club relay championships between the three Auckland clubs. Keeping the numbers high for that was tough. And we found that we could improve the accessibility of this inter-club relay by making it a sprint and just making it closer to town. And
Take it back. I have done a relay. I've done one of those.
Oh, okay, you've done an Auckland one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a different part of your mind compared to where like the elite angle for the sprint relay came from Europe and from the World Cup and World Champs. This was like a relay, but a sprint, whereas like sprint relay is a thing now. So yeah, we had kind of relays like that, and I have done I think 2 JWOC sprint relays now, and fast and furious for sure.
Yep, short, like frequent splits, often not very far apart, and also requiring a high degree of precision to make sure that you're getting your control and not mispunching, because that's a frequent issue in sprint relays, is mispunches.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of fast decisions being made under immense physical stress.
Yeah, and they've got we've got the final of the World Cup coming up first weekend of October over in Italy, and they have a sprint relay in their event program. Last event of the World Cup for this year.
Yeah, that's right. So if you are interested in following some of these international races, we've had JWOC and JWOC recently. You can go to orienteering.sport, and the IOF website at that location has a live page for you, and it's got all these big events and how you can follow the coverage. They have live TV and commentary on a lot of these. So I definitely recommend you check out the IOF website for links on how to watch some of these world champs and get some insight into some of the orienteering that happens overseas, cameras out in the forest, GPS tracking.
There is a charge for the live video, but I reckon it's worth watching once. It's pretty interesting. The production is pretty good now, and they've kind of figured out the commentary rather than trying to be 100% up to the moment. They tend to look for interesting happenings and routes and go and discuss them. So it's quite a good learning opportunity too, especially if you're in lockdown.
For JWOC, we also had a little live chat going on Zoom with some of us where we were watching and discussing some of the routes. So yeah, you can do stuff like that. This is a photo from out on the terrain for the World Cup coming up in Italy. As usual, they take the photos of the nicest part of the forest you could possibly imagine. Always guarantee really it's nice, not all like that, but some of it's like that at least. So
I've orienteered near here back in 2009, and it's amazing terrain, really good. We've got a map up as well which shows you some of the detail. It's an awesome place to run.
That's right. So a lot of depressions, a lot of cliffs as well, some stony ground, and it looks like there's a lot of clearings in the terrain as well. Were there a lot of clearings on the areas that you were running on?
The area we were slightly higher altitude than this, so it was slightly more alpine, so the clearings were a little bit more developed. The map also had an extensive system of old trenches in it. It's from World War One. So I didn't even know there was an Italian front, but there was. So that added like another little maze-like element to parts of it. The rock is limestone, it's cast. So all the principles that you use around having many repetitive, similarly sized depressions kind of take away a little bit of the utility of contours at times. So the clearings were relevant. But we tended to I seem to remember using the bigger contour shapes because you were still on a slope as well as having the depressions. So yeah, it was challenging terrain, good fun. We didn't do any competitions on it. We just did a training camp.
Yeah, cool. It does look very challenging, and because of those reasons that you mentioned, there's repetition, a lot of similarly sized hills and depressions, and even the clearings that were all kind of patchy and looking quite similar in a number of ways. So I think map contact will be really important in this kind of terrain, and if you can pick out things that are unique or unique combinations of features, then you're putting yourself at a massive advantage to others, because that is such a challenge on this terrain. If you can pick out something that's you're going to see from a distance and simplify everything between where you are now and seeing that unique feature, then you're going to be doing well for yourself.
Definitely. And I mean, it might be worth, if you're interested, it might be worth watching the live stream. You can see how the best in the world handle it. Shall we wrap up there? I've got a question for you, Jean, to finish to think about. So let's say we could have New Zealand nationals long anywhere we wanted in the country, somewhere new though, something like thinking about something a bit different, where would you have it?
That's a good question that I haven't really thought of too much, to be honest. I am personally excited to see what Nelson come up with next year. I understand that they're happy to do some orienteering at a distance from a main centre, and they've taken the approach of going for something that's unique and different. So something like that, I feel like, in at the back of Nelson or towards Abel Tasman or wherever these maps are, would be really interesting. I've also been quite interested in Central Plateau, driving through there a number of times. You could stage a very unique long distance event on like the Tukino side, for example, of Mount Ruapehu, where you've got this big slope and lots of valleys and the sandy areas and tussock and a lot of detail, actually. Like the contour, it's not steep. It's actually quite detailed with lots of knolls and little streams and eroded areas. It would be pretty mind-blowing, I think. So yeah, how's that?
You read my mind. I was going to say Mangatapopo Hut on between Tukino and the chateau. We're even around the chateau at the Central Plateau.
Right, on that side, you've got some beach forest as well.
Beach forest, which would be runnable. You've got the route choice and the track elements we've talked about. You've got the marshes. I don't think in the golf course. I don't know if we'd be allowed to, but I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, something like that as a one-off. Maybe we get there at some stage, and yeah, maybe that's something for people to imagine over the next 20 years. What is something that you can set up an event? Maybe it's like a novel orienteering expo. You just take just 2 days on a long weekend to do orienteering that you're never going to do again. Maybe it's a one-off that the entry fees just go straight to the mapping and it breaks even. Yeah, there's a lot of things that we can dream up and hopefully put some of these things that seem impossible into the history books. So Tukino Ski Field, we've both tabled that, so it's got 2 votes already, leading.
I reckon maybe without snow, maybe it'd be a summer event.
A summer event, yeah. I don't know about accommodation. Maybe it is just
Mangatapopo is a big hut. Maybe it's actually better. Anyway, should we leave it there?
Yeah, we'll leave it there for this month. Thank you everyone for watching, and see you guys next month.
See you next month. Bye.
If you liked the show, please support it by sharing this podcast with one person who would benefit from it. The best place to find more content like this is at genebeveridge.nz, where you can find years of training blogs, race reports, podcasts, and coaching videos. If you don't want to miss future episodes, I recommend subscribing to my newsletter by visiting genebeveridge.nz or by following on social media, Perfect Flow on Facebook and Gene Beveridge on Instagram. For Q&A, send messages to nav@perfectflow.nz.